The more you tell someone who they are, the less you have to tell them what to do. Because action flows from identity. We've been tracing this now for a couple of sessions. And I just want to remind you that this is the theme of the book of Daniel. Regardless of what stories we encounter or what images start to emerge, identity is at the core. And the more you tell someone who they are, the less you have to tell them what to do. But that equation also works in reverse. It works in reverse in the sense of your actions reveal who you are. And by default, who you belong to. And sometimes that's really difficult for us in the church or outside the church to accept. Because we love to blame everything on just, everybody sins. No, the reality is your actions should match who you belong to. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like going up to a banana tree, picking off a banana, and taking a bite and go, my goodness, this banana is great. And just for the sake of the illustration, the banana tree talks back to you and says, oh no, I'm sorry. I'm glad you enjoyed the fruit, but I'm not a banana tree. I'm an apple tree. And of course, you're holding the banana, and so you respond back, that is ridiculous. Almost as ridiculous as a talking tree. But that is ridiculous. This is a banana. You are not an apple tree. Oh, yes, I am. I am an apple tree, and I don't care what you say. Here's the reality. The fruit helps us identify who it is, because the fruit reveals the identity. And here's the news for you, Christian. If you're producing bananas, you're a banana tree. I don't care what you say. You're a banana tree. Because your actions reveal who you are. And by default, they also reveal who you belong to. In Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar is deeply disturbed by a dream. And he is so disturbed by the dream that he decides to call in all of his wise men. Well, not all of them, but the majority of his wise men to give him an interpretation. He is desperate for answers. At this point, everything seems to be going normal. Nebuchadnezzar brings men and says, I have a dream, I need your interpretation. And then some of the wise men respond back in verse 4, tell your servants the dream, O king, and we will interpret it. Verse 5 is where things start to get awkward. King Nebuchadnezzar says this, this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Now, I don't know if you caught that, but that is outlandish. Absolutely ludicrous. I mean, my goodness, interpreting a dream is hard enough. But you're not even going to say what the dream is? You have to, the wise men have to both tell you what the dream was and interpret it. And if they don't, they're cut to pieces? But if they do, we'll drown you with wealth. Verse 7, you kind of feel the nervousness of the wise men. They're like, let me clear my throat and just repeat what I said before. Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Which ticks Nebuchadnezzar off. Verse 8, he loses it. He says, I am certain that all you're trying to do is gain time. You're just stalling. Because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. Nebuchadnezzar is raging. He is impatiently furious, and he's demanding outlandish things. However, you should expect that from evil. Because that's what evil does. You see, one of the ways for Christians to be able to better understand what it is we need to be doing. It's to put a contrast in place. A contrast where we're seeing the way that evil even treats each other. And this isn't the only time we're going to see this in the book of Daniel. This will come up multiple times, where we look at the anatomy of evil to understand more clearly who we are as the good. Because the contrast actually brings about clarity. The contrast brings about deeper understanding of not just who I am in comparison, but how I should act. Nebuchadnezzar loses his mind, and he sends out the edict. All of the wise men are to be killed. Here's the problem. Not all the wise men were there in this moment, because Daniel and his friends were not called in by Nebuchadnezzar to tell the dream and to interpret it. However, in verse 14, the commander of the king's guards come knocking on the door of Daniel and his friends, and he says, hey, in case you didn't heard, I'm here to execute you. And I love this in verse 14. It says, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He didn't panic. Death isn't something that those that belong to the God of resurrection have to fear. However, Daniel is concerned about acting too rashly. The impatience of Nebuchadnezzar collides with the patience of Daniel. He responds with wisdom and tact, and he says, explain to me what's going on. The commander's like, well, there's this decree because of a dream. And Daniel goes, can you give me just a little bit of time? I will pray to my God, and he will respond, because that's who my God is. Commander's like, I mean, it's your death. I mean, go for it. I mean, I might as well give you a little more time. So once we get down to verse 18, Daniel goes to his friends and he says, we need to pray. But listen why Daniel wants to pray. It's not just self-preservation. He asks and pleads for mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends, Daniel and his buddies, might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Daniel is concerned about even the people that are his enemies. Why unnecessary death? Why is it that death is what it is that evil entrusts all of their problems to? As if death can fix what is broken in life. Sometimes the contrasts help us understand who it is that we are and how it is we should act. We'll come back to that in a minute. But now we need to dive into verses 31 through 45, which is the dream. Daniel receives the word from the Lord. Not only does God interpret the dream, but he tells Daniel the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And so in verses 31 through 45, Daniel goes before Nebuchadnezzar and he says, you had a dream of a big statue. And Nebuchadnezzar goes, go on, I'm listening. Daniel goes, at the very top was a head made out of gold. And then you went down and you saw a chest of silver. He says, and then the further down you saw a belly and thighs that were made out of bronze. And then at the very bottom, you saw feet and legs made out of iron and clay. At this point, he says, Nebuchadnezzar, am I right so far? And he says, you're exactly right. I saw an enormous statue. Daniel says, let me interpret what this means. The gold head is Babylon. That's you. You're at the top and you are precious. He says the silver, that is a future empire. And it's actually an empire made up of an alliance called the Medo-Persian Empire. We'll come back to this later, especially in chapter 7. The bronze, he says, the bronze, that's an even more distant empire known as the Greek Empire. And then finally, the iron and clay is the Roman Empire from the city of Rome. Now, here's the absolutely amazing thing is this. Daniel is living here under Babylon. This is a prediction of what will happen over the next 500 years or so, and that is startling. That is a predictive power that can only come from the one that is sovereign over all of history, not from humanity. However, it is so tempting in this moment to become enamored with a prediction. Because let's be honest, this is a pretty cool trick. I mean, not only is Daniel able to tell Nebuchadnezzar's dream without anybody ever telling him, but he's able to interpret it. And then when we hear the interpretation, it is predicting hundreds of years of who will follow. Nebuchadnezzar is overwhelmed, and he is so overwhelmed with gratitude that he's like, I'm going to promote you, Daniel. I'm going to give you all kinds of treasures. I'm going to try to enamor you with things that don't really matter. And sometimes we become enamored with the things that matter the least, because here's the point. The goal of chapter 2 is not prediction. The goal of chapter 2 is not to merely become obsessed with what will be happening in the future. No. The goal of chapter 2 is to show you a clear contrast of how evil functions so that you, as followers of God, will know what to do. Because when you go through this text, you see the way in which evil always functions. You can expect it. In verse 5, loyalty means nothing to Nebuchadnezzar. His wise men have done nothing wrong. And yet he brings them before him and he makes this outlandish demand of them. Because that's what evil does. Faithfulness is not their native tongue. Infidelity is. But servants of God? We are rooted in faithfulness because we serve the one that is eternally faithful. Once you get down to verse 6, you see another characteristic of evil. Wealth is the answer to everything. I want this interpretation. I want this dream now, so I will give you wealth and you give me what I want. Why? Because I trust wealth to solve all my problems. But for the people of God, we understand that the things that matter most are not even captured or able to be captured in materials. We understand that people matter more than wealth and even power. Evil is being unmasked. In verse 9, you see mistrust. Mistrust of the very people that belong to Nebuchadnezzar. He looks at the wise men and he says, I know you're just trying to conspire against me. I know you're just trying to deceive me. Where does the mistrust come from? Answer, their identity. It's their native tongue. They only understand mistrust, but people of God? Trust is the very foundation of our relationship with God, and it should be the foundation of our relationship with each other. Trust. Without trust, all you can rely on is suspicion and deception. That is not who we are, and that is not how we act. But evil is being unmasked. Death is their master. Verse 12, if you don't do what I want, I will kill you. Why? Because that is my ultimate weapon, because death is my master. And one of the things that's also characteristic of evil is that not only do they grab a hold of death to solve everything, but they even are willing to trample the innocent. Because Daniel and his friends weren't guilty of anything. They weren't even involved in the interaction. And yet they were going to be executed. You see, the point of this chapter is not so much an unveiling of the future as it is an unmasking of who evil is, and therefore how evil acts. And yet in this revelation, there is a call to Christians, a call to followers of God, that your actions must match your identity. Because you cannot claim to be an apple tree if you keep producing bananas. You cannot claim the identity of a child of God if you keep producing the fruit of evil. They do not go together. It is actually as absurd as demanding that someone tell you your dream and make them interpret it. Your actions must match your identity. And sometimes what we need most is a contrast. Listen, I've said it twice now and I'm going to say it again. The more you tell someone who they are, the less you have to tell them what to do. Because your actions flow from your identity. And in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar was speaking out of his identity. He was acting out of his identity of evil. He was matching the master he belongs to. And here's what I want to ask us here at the end of this session. Do your actions match your identity? As a child of God, as a follower of Christ, who as he hung on the tree, as he hung on the cross, he cried out, "Father, forgive my enemies. They don't know what they're doing." Who refused to trample the innocent or the guilty. Do your actions match your identity? And if they don't, then you need to be more honest about what type of tree you are actually producing and what type of fruit is the result.